I'm delighted today to be joined by Rosie Dunscombe, Chartered Accountant, Environmental Economist and founder of Blue Crane Consulting. Hi Rosie, welcome.
Hi Laura, thanks for having me.
So, really interested today to talk to you about how businesses are looking at integrating sustainability into their strategic priorities. So how do you sort of see that that's changed over the last few decades?
Yeah, I think there's been a huge change, Laura, and we never would have been sitting and having this conversation 20 years ago, which is, that just shows you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think that it's gone from something that was seen as like a fluffy, nice to have that some companies did, and then we've been through a bit of an era of a tick box exercise where we saw the focus increasing, and now it's really, commercially critical for organisations. And on a personal note, I worked in finance for many years and then transitioned into environmental economics, as you noted in your introduction. And when I did that, it was seen as a huge career change. I was going to do something different. And today, those same old colleagues are now calling me up to ask, how can we integrate people and planet alongside profit? And that, to me, is just really showing how far we've come.
Yeah, I think if I think back to, where I was working the last, 10, 20 years ago, there used to be sort of eco products on the product roadmap, and for whatever reason, they just weren't the business's strategic priority at the time, so they'd get being pushed back on the roadmap, and never really started the development on them. And it's actually only sort of recently, the last few years, last few weeks actually, that we've started to see some of these products actually come onto the market. So that development's finally taken place, and they've realised the importance of products. So what do you think those key forces behind that drive in changing in commercial attitudes?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're talking about products, consumer pressure is a big one. Consumers are now wanting to buy products that are more sustainability sensitive, but there's a whole raft of stakeholders there, and I think we're seeing it with investors and providers of finance wanting to see sustainability credentials from companies. We're also seeing insurance companies, wanting to see credentials, how people are mitigating and adapting to climate change, because that's affecting their business model. So I think really across a raft of stakeholders, there's a lot of pressure on organisations, internally as well, employees. I think one of the most asked questions at interview last year was, what are your ESG credentials? So we're really seeing it coming out. And then we layer on top of that, the media presence around the world now, and social media means that what was once seen as outside the corporate boundary is now being internalised. You may have something happening down your supply chain overseas that is, not seen as your responsibility. That is now being made your responsibility. If consumers hear about that, that affects purchases, it affects your bottom line. And then layer on top of that regulation, we could be here all day, but there's huge swathes of regulation.
Constantly changing,
particularly in Europe and the UK.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that it's important to note that doesn't just affect big companies, because that trickles down through supply chains. If you're a small company starting out and you're wanting to supply to one of the big organisations, they're going to demand those credentials from you.
Yeah, and I guess all of those things, they're reported in the media, social media. It's just driving a broader awareness across the board. And as we know, awareness creates demand, and demand creates competition in turn. But sustainability it's not just about product, is it? We have people phoning us up all the time saying, "Oh, I've got this product idea. It needs to be made of sustainable materials." And whilst that's like a good thing to have at the start, and to have that initial sort of thought is one thing, but as we know, as you know, having a sustainable product doesn't mean you've got a sustainability. And actually, the buzzwords at the moment is the triple bottom line. It's all about planet, profit, people.
Exactly. I think that point you made is a really good one. A sustainable product does not make a sustainable company. And I think it's about it being a strategic priority and understanding where as a company you can have the most impact, and also where you can manage your risks around sustainability.
Because it's a really hard one just to kind of get your head around, isn't it? Where does a company even begin to make those changes and identify areas they can improve? What would you say are the key sort of sticking points for that?
Yeah, it can be really hard for a company looking to take those first steps. And I think because it can seem a big mountain to climb, there is a tendency to rush ahead. And I think because how do we measure our impacts? How can we value that? How can we communicate that to stakeholders is often the primary concern I see with businesses. And so there's a tendency to rush towards that and say, well, we need to measure our emissions. But it's a false economy to rush towards that. I think stepping back and taking the time to say, how does this fit with my broader business objectives? What is my mission statement? What is my strategy? How does sustainability support that? And what are the risks coming from sustainability that might knock us off path? And taking time to understand that and why sustainability is important to your business and coming back to that constantly in your journey is vital so that you don't get sort of distracted by maybe the popular issue of the time, like, you know, maybe making your product out of bamboo, which can be a really good thing, but actually might not be the biggest impact you're having.
Yeah, I think it's noticing the difference, isn't it, between, you know, a real big actual systematic change versus just a fad or a trend and something that they just need to like sort of look at.
And I think that's where the word greenwash can creep in, that there is a risk then it's seen as greenwash if you're just latching onto the latest fad as opposed to really taking a strategic approach.
Yeah, and that's a huge undertaking, especially for, you know, the larger the business, the harder it is, when you have to consider sort of every touch point in the supply chain, you know, coming in and out of the business. And also if you think of consuming as a concept, you know, really to be sustainable, we will need to be consuming less, buying less, using it for longer, and then thinking about, you know, the cradle to cradle, you know, to use another buzzword, impact of that product, and what do we do with it at its end of life. And if you're a brand, how do you support that? How do you make it easy for people to keep them brand loyal? And that's, I think, something quite difficult for businesses to sort of get their head around, that thought of, I have to sell less in order to be more profitable.
Yeah.
So that's how. What would your approach be to that? Because, you know, there's obviously companies like Patagonia that offer the free repair service. They don't want people to buy more, and that's formulated sort of a real intrinsic part of their strategy, their values, their marketing campaigns. But of course, we can't all be a Patagonia, but there must be ways that every business can improve their approach to sustainability.
Absolutely, and I think what you're saying is probably what a lot of businesses are feeling. Oh, this is hard, and it is.
It is, yeah.
But look at what you're already doing as a business. Lots of aspects of business are hard. Financial reporting is hard. Paying your taxes on time, that's hard, but you managed to do it. And we can do the same with sustainability. And I think that as, you know, a business owner or a general business manager, you know your business, you know, and that is worth a lot. That is really critical. And so in terms of that, you're looking to embed sustainability in your business. Knowing your business and knowing how sustainability can support your objectives is absolutely critical. So taking the time, I think, to step back and say, how does this fit strategically? And really come back to that throughout your sustainability journey. Why am I doing this? Why am I tackling issues on sustainability? And it is a bit of, you know, looking at Patagonia, their mission statement is possibly a bit different to other companies, and that's fantastic for them. Not going to work for everyone, but looking at what are the key risks and opportunities to my business. And I think starting off with the kind of why are you tackling sustainability? Who are your key stakeholders and what are their wants and needs? You know, and making sure you talk their language, and therefore, based on all of that, what is it you need to tackle? And I think when we look at sustainability, we quite often think in terms of impacts and, you know, greenhouse gas emissions, maybe plastics in the oceans. Now, how are we impacting on our environment? But really important to consider how the environment and how society is impacting us as a business. How am I depending on it? Are those resources going to be available in the future? How might climate change affect my operations? So think of it in those two lenses is really key, and then that sets you up really nicely for how am I going to tackle these issues.
Yeah, and embedding it into company culture, which is always difficult to do, but is probably another key one to making it easier and just sort of also becomes just intrinsic to decision making. It's always almost something that you don't have to think about.
Yeah, and it's a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and if you look at companies, you know, you mentioned Patagonia and the Unilevers and Danones of the world, people who've done good stuff with sustainability, they have a whole team there.
Yeah.
And so whilst it is an intrinsic part of business, they're having to work at it. They have a team there. And you know what? Everyone's on this journey. Everyone's learning. And I've worked with a range of companies, and those ones that you see kind of in the news doing great stuff, they work hard at it and they make mistakes, and they're learning the whole time. Yeah. So whilst it can be seen as a scary topic, you just need to take those first steps and have a go.
Yeah, it's a journey, like you say, and it's really a fascinating subject, and I think it's something that's, you know, we talked about awareness earlier. It's something that's going to keep sort of gaining in momentum and importance, and the awareness of it as well. So I wish you luck in all that you do, because it sounds like you're going to be very busy with all these businesses needing your help. But I'll have to invite you back again to delve into some of those topics in more detail.
That'd be lovely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks.
Cheers.